So just want to start by making sure you're all aware of the Maddies Fund mission. And our mission is to revolutionize the status and well-being of companion animals in the United States. So we're not just about shelters and shelters only, although that's obviously our primary focus. We want every pet in the United States to have a healthy home or habitat, and that's really our focus. And so obviously some of that is before they go to shelters, some of that is after they leave shelters or rescues. So why the Idea Lab? There's a lot of great research going on in the US to help shelter pets. And research will help you to kind of sell effective programs to your director, your board, or maybe your staff. I hear from so many people, I want to start this program, but our director is saying unless there's research to support it, we can't do it. And that's why we're supporting practical research that most importantly has a direct and positive impact on pets in our shelters, or like I said, before they go to shelters. And so that's what the idea is behind our Idea Lab. In terms of topics that we're interested in, lots of different topics. If it impacts life-saving, if it impacts the utilization of foster care, if it impacts the development of animal welfare leadership, we're interested in those types of ideas. Those are the things we have the most interest in right now in terms of research and actually all of our programs. As far as research grants go right now, there's two main types of opportunity. The deadline just passed for this one, but you might want to think about it for next year. And these are summer scholar grants. So these are grants to give students some experience in research and exposure to the animal welfare field. We've had some really great proposals in the past and do this year as well. But that would be for next year and next summer. And then we also have our Idea Lab research grants. And basically this is where you would send a message to us saying, I have this idea. I think this idea is really going to help us with our goals for animal welfare. We'll let you know whether we agree that that's something that we want to support versus not, and then encourage you to fill out an application. And we have quarterly application deadlines. And if you're a shelter or rescue, we hook you up with a research scientist so that you can get the data in the way that will most benefit and optimize your likelihood of getting results. And vice versa, we hook up research scientists with ideas with shelters and rescues. So now getting into the bulk and the part that I'm really excited to talk about today, which is some of our results. I'm going to be talking about 4 different projects. And so foster care is something that we're really interested in. We believe that shelter pets are happier in homes. And we now have research that actually supports this concept and tells us that, and you'll hear some of it today, that foster pets are happier in homes. And we believe that being in homes can increase adoption opportunities, whether it be friends, family, acquaintances of our foster caregivers, or getting great pictures and videos that you can share on social media. So the first project I'm talking about is foster care market research. Because we wanted to look at recruiting foster caregivers, that's a very common concern is, yes, I know foster care is great, but we can't get any foster caregivers. How do we get more foster caregivers? So Edge Research worked on this project for us, and lots of small text on this slide, but basically telling you there's 2 phases to the project. The first phase was kind of a detailed, in-depth phase where we had focus groups with prospective foster caregivers in 3 different cities in the United States. And then the IDI you see up there, that's in-depth interviews. So there were also interviews with experienced foster caregivers and pet care professionals like veterinarians and dog trainers and dog walkers to gather information, which allowed Edge Research to develop a detailed survey that they sent to a large number of people. You can see it went to over 1,000 prospective foster caregivers and a little more than 800 experienced foster caregivers. And this was done June of 2017. And so we got a lot of information from this project, and I'm going to share a little bit of it with you today. One of the things we started out by asking people is, what is your interest in foster caregiving? And you can see that the initial interest, and these were of prospects. So these were of people who we thought had a higher likelihood of being foster caregivers because they already had pets or had interest in adopting pets. So that we knew that this was from a selected population of people who had interest in pets. And even among that population, only 13% of them were initially interested. So it's pretty small, but on the other side of the coin, we have a huge population in the United States. So 13% of our entire population is still something. And we can see that people who had above average interest were people who had knowledge about the problem. People under 40, interestingly, apartment dwellers were interested in foster caregivers, in being foster caregivers. Familiarity with it, women, and single. Those are all factors that increased interest. And so then we looked at interest in fostering different types of pets. And I have everything blocked out because some of the results are kind of interesting, and I'm going to share them with you now. So let's talk about adult dogs versus puppies. Which do you think people are more interested in being foster caregivers? How many think people want to foster puppies? How many people think people want to foster adult dogs? You guys, most of you are right. So this should be the next slide. So yeah, so many people I hear talking about, well, everybody wants to foster the puppies. They're so cute. But turns out that our prospective foster caregivers are smart and recognize that puppies are a lot of work. So as you look at this entire list here, you'll see that the things on top tend to be the easier things. And as we go down, things they're less interested in tend to be the more challenging things. One note is for aggressive behavior. So this one, it was specified that they weren't talking about aggression towards the foster and their family. And the other thing to mention is that in our focus groups, they talked about things that were kind of non-starters. They would never, ever foster a dog that needs housebreaking issues or is incontinent or is very messy. They were really concerned about maintaining their household, which is understandable. And then one other category just to compare, it's also interesting to me, I'm a veterinary behaviorist. People are more likely to foster an aggressive dog than they are to foster a dog with destructive behavior. And that's just bad. I understand people want their house to be nice, but I think most of us in this room that understand that destructive behavior is solved by managing behavior and we can prevent it. But really, really interesting to think and look at these prospective foster caregivers' perceptions. So I'm not expecting you to read this, but we tested messages. So we got that initial interest in foster caregiver, and then we tried a variety of messages for these prospective caregivers, and then assessed how it changed their interest in foster caregiving. And we found that after that messaging, it doubled the interest in foster caregiving. So now we're up to 26%. And you can see, interestingly, household with kids are now more interested in fostering. And you can see some other changes some similarities, some changes in the people who are. So messaging is super important, not surprisingly. In terms of what information sources they trust, so how do they want to hear about fostering and learn about it, veterinarians and pet health professionals, really important. And I think I'm a veterinarian and I feel comfortable saying there's some veterinarians out there who don't have the most positive things to say about shelters and rescues. And it's clearly really, really important, especially when we're talking about foster care, to build those relationships with our private practice veterinarians because they're great spokespeople for us. And then the second biggest category is friends and family who have fostered in the past or know something about fostering. That was a really, really common thing that people really trusted from people they know. And you can see that for whatever reason, pet trainers, there was lower trust in dog trainers. I don't know why. And then national animal protection organizations were much lower in trust than local shelters and rescues, which I'm guessing is good for almost everyone in the room because I'm guessing you're all local shelters and rescues. So that's awesome. So conclusions, this is a big busy slide and you're not going to be able to read it all. I'm happy to share the slides with anybody who wants them afterwards. My email address is idealab@maddiesfund.org. But conclusions, public education about the role of fostering is super important because people were worried about what am I going to do? Is it too much for me? Can I actually do this? We want to use our current foster caregivers to share their expertise and experience to recruit other foster caregivers. Potential foster caregivers are more interested in fostering if they have more options in terms of types of fostering they can do. So whether it be team fostering, whether it be weekend fostering, whether it be an emergency foster situation, the more options they have, then they can pick the option that works for them. And if you really think about it, there are lots of different ways that people can foster. All right, so that is foster care market research. Going to move on and talk about some of our playgroup research. I could probably easily spend a whole day talking about each of these topics. We have so much data in them, and trying to distill everything down to just little pieces. So this was a project we did last year. Did anyone in this room remember responding to this survey? A couple, thank you. Thank you for helping out. So our respondents to this survey, we got, I believe, around 800, I'll say on other slides, initial responses that were weeded down to around 500 or 600 based on qualifications for the survey. But you can see that 67% of our organizations came from private nonprofit organizations. 47% of the organizations were municipal or private with municipal contracts. On average, the respondents who responded to this survey had been running playgroups for about 4 years. So one of the questions was whether people allowed, so you can see 500 respondents here, whether they allowed dogs of all sizes and weights into playgroups, and the answer was close to 50-50. So some people only allowed certain sizes and weights in playgroup, and others were not allowed. We also asked about the average size of a typical playgroup, and this was a little bit, the results of this were a little bit surprising to me because the last organization I worked at where I was actually working directly with animals, we got our entire population out at once. And I thought that's what a lot of we also weren't a huge organization. We had about 20 dogs in our care at a time, so we could get all out at once. A lot of people can't do that. But interestingly, the average size of playgroups is the kind of most popular is what I consider really, really small. 2 to 4 dogs or 5 to 7 dogs at a time. And only 50% of the respondents, they said they only got an average of 50% dogs at a time. So how many people in here run playgroups? Awesome, those of you who do. So of the ones that responded in this survey, only 50% of dogs were getting out, which was pretty sad for me to hear because playgroups can have so many benefits for staff and for the dogs themselves, and I would love to see a much higher percentage. Some of that can be because of things like quarantine requirements and things like that, but where I worked, we got almost all of our dogs into playgroup, even little puppies. So in terms of how often they utilize, it looks like, wow, that's great. A lot of organizations utilize playgroup more than once a day. But remember that a lot of this is 2 to 4 dogs at a time, so they're just having lots of tiny little playgroups getting dogs out. And this is a really big slide, but we did some work in looking at, have you ever used different types of tools in your playgroups? And you can see that almost everything we asked had been used at least once. This is an ever, not frequency question. In general, in terms of types of things that were used, 20% of our respondents primarily, not solely, but primarily used correction-based techniques such as a voice to correct dogs or a spray bottle. 11% primarily used rewarding dogs for good behavior as a technique, and 67% used mixed techniques. 2% had no idea what we were asking about when we were talking about mixed versus positive versus correction. And then when we looked at frequency of tools used, the most frequent tools that were used, and they were used more than 6 to 10 times per play group, were treats, voice to praise, so using their own voice to praise the dog, prong or pinch collar, and then using voice to correct. So we also asked about fights. And so during the last 10 play groups, how many times did fights happen? We didn't ask about seriousness here. The average was 1 fight per play group. And so this could have been a serious fight. This could have just been a little rah at each other. We don't know. But then we asked over the past year, how many fights during play group were serious fights that were really difficult to break up. I think we all know these types of dog fights, or if you're lucky and don't know, that's great. Or required medical treatment. And the average number of more serious fights per year was 3. You can see that 7.3% have 6 or more serious fights per year. And luckily it's only 7%, but that is pretty concerning to me, that if you're having a lot of serious fights, you might need to be considering doing something else in terms of how you're managing the dogs. And then in terms of people getting bitten, the average was 1 person per year. And once again, we don't know how serious it was, except that it did break the skin. And then this slide I'm not going to have time to go through, but the bottom line for this slide is, so we asked people's opinions about playgroup, and our respondents said that they thought playgroups were a good thing. So they helped to reduce stress. They did not frequently cause dog injuries. So everything here they responded really well to and said, we love playgroups. So in conclusion, it's nice to know that playgroups are fairly common and participants felt really positively about them. Didn't love the fact that playgroup size is on average relatively small and most shelters only get 50% of their dogs out. Good that injuries are uncommon, but there's a lot we don't know. And hopefully we'll be getting more research about playgroups. We are funding a project right now comparing the effectiveness and welfare of different sizes, so smaller versus larger size playgroups, and comparing a focus on different types of techniques in terms of how that impacts our playgroup. So stay tuned in the next year for those results. All right. So the next I'm going to talk about is Maddies Pet Assistant. This is a little dog, Spot, that I fostered. And I just love this picture so much. This woman was just so happy to adopt this little puppy. So post-adoption follow-up. How many of you regularly do post-adoption follow-up? A number of you, great. So there's obviously all different types of follow-ups that can happen, whether it be email, whether it be phone calls, whether it be SurveyMonkey surveys. And there's all different types of frequencies. A lot of what I know I used to lecture about, recommending doing follow-up at 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. But there's no data to support that that's the optimal frequency for follow-up. And my experience as I was doing more follow-up was that I actually wanted to intervene earlier because of when I was discovering problems after adoption. And in the past 12 years or so, we do have some research that's looking at when problems are most likely to happen after pets go home. So this is a project from the UK, and they found that the most dogs, or 50% of dogs, were returned within the first 27 days after adoption, so the first month being that critical period. And then another study done back in 2005 by Shore et al. Found that 54% of dogs were returned within the first 2 weeks, so shortening that period. And that was a United States study. This was, you could see, a UK study. And 50% of the adopters said that the problem or concern that was the reason for return was noticed on the very first day they had the dog, and a further 16.9% during the first week. So that's 75% of problems that are being identified in that first week. So that first week is really, really important. And so now there's an app for that. We developed an app called Maddies Pet Assistant. This is a mobile app for adopters and foster caregivers. And I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll tell you some of what we've learned. One of our goals with this app is to support adopters and foster caregivers. Another of our goals with this app is to support shelters and enhance your ability to provide customer service. And another is to collect data and find out what happens to pets, what's normal behavior, what's outside of normal when they go into adoptive or foster homes. So the way Maddies Pet Assistant works is we have automatic data import. So a shelter signs up to use Maddies, or rescue, signs up to use Maddies Pet Assistant. So if I just adopted a dog, I could download the app, but I can't use it. So we want to enhance those relationships with shelters, so the shelter signing up is a requirement. For certain shelter softwares right now, Shelter Love, Pet Point, and Animal Shelter Manager, there's automatic data upload, so your information gets pulled from your shelter software into Maddies Pet Assistant. We're working on getting other shelter softwares on board, but you can also do manual entry of data. Question?
Yes. I signed up for this last week. Should I wait?
So the question was, you just found out about the app and you're about to transfer from Pet Point to Shelter Love. Should you wait? Probably it's going to be the only difference is you have to enter a code for Pet Point and then you'd have to enter to a different code for Shelter Love. So I'd say if it's going to be, the transition is going to be 4 months, I'd probably do Pet Point now, but if the transition is going to be pretty quick, I'd wait. But you're using 2 compatible systems, which is awesome. So like I said, for softwares that are not compatible, there is a manual entry option at this time. So the adopter or foster caregiver gets an email asking them to download the app. And they download the app and their pet is automatically in the app. And there's several different functions to the app. The only one I'm going to be talking about today, because it's primarily where our research is related to, is our survey. So this is actually a foster kitten. And this is an introductory survey, and this kitten is 5 weeks old. And the surveys ask questions related to the most common problems after a pet goes home. The surveys go out on day 1, day 3, day 7, then 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks after adoption. Over the long term, we will probably have surveys for more long-term follow-up, but right now we're focusing on that first month because of what the data has taught us. Oh yeah, thank you, and it's free. There's no cost for using Maddies Pet Assistant. Thank you, my little birdie. And then, so what happens? A foster caregiver or adopter fills out this survey, and then they write in the app or via email. So if my kitten was having diarrhea, I'm going to get an email giving me some helpful tips. All of these helpful tips were developed by veterinarians, veterinary behaviorists, dog trainers, shelter managers, lots of different people with background to help adopted and fostered pets. And there's also questions to help us assess the severity of the problem. So if there's answers that are more concerning, then there are things that say your foster kittens may need veterinary care. So this says, yes, it's having diarrhea, but if it's also vomiting, lethargic, not eating, you should probably contact the shelter. And then the next step, so that's what the adopter sees, but then the shelter also can keep track of what surveys have been reviewed and also the severity of the answers on the survey. So surveys can be marked red, yellow, blue, or nothing. A red indicates that there's something fairly concerning that we recommend you respond as soon as possible. Yellow is intermediate concern. Blue is something like a comment someone entered, so you should pay attention to it, but it's definitely not something urgent in terms of response. So now talking about data related to the app. So first going to talk about usage of Maddies Pet Assistant or MPA and feedback that we've received. So we have 136 active shelters and rescues that are using the app. We launched last May. And we have end users, our adopters or foster caregivers. We have 6,668 as of last week, people who have completed surveys, and you can see that it's a little more than 50% dogs, a little less than 50% cats who have data. And feedback about the app has been pretty positive. 81% of our organizations definitely or probably recommend using the app to other organizations. And 88% of adopters, 87% of our foster caregivers say that their experience using the app has been positive or very positive. This is one of my favorite foster dogs of all time. Her name was Gwen Stefani, and she's been in her home for about 7 years now. And that's her and her mom. And so we've also looked at, and this is information, so we follow up with our shelters to see how they're feeling about the app and if they're recommending any changes. We also follow up with the people who are actually using the app and to see how things are going. We just started looking at what type of follow-up people were doing before using and how the effort they're expending on follow-up changes once they use MPA, because I want to be able to tell you all, is it a lot more work once you use the app, less, what's going on? So you can see that 30% of people who have responded to this survey, to this new question on the survey, the sample size is super, super small. It's only 7 people. So you can kind of take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. But 30% follow up with every single adopter, and then everyone else is less than that. So the majority of people who are signing up to use Maddies Pet Assistant have somewhat of probably have somewhat of an inconsistent follow-up plan, and that's probably why they're interested in the app, right? And when we look at amount of time, so a small percent are spending more than before Maddies Pet Assistant. I hope that those are people who did no follow-up at all, and now they're doing some, so it's probably a little bit more work. But the majority of people saying that they're spending the exact same amount of time or less than before they started using the app, which is good to hear. And then now to share just a little bit of data from our surveys. Think about this. So I'm gonna share inappropriate elimination, so cats or dogs peeing in locations that we consider to be inappropriate 1 month after adoption, dogs or cats. So and then we're gonna talk about day 1 after adoption and day 30. So how many of you think dogs have more inappropriate elimination on the first day after adoption? Okay, and how many of you think cats have a bigger problem? So more people say dogs. And then what about on it's actually day 29, not day 30, but how many of you feel that dogs have more of a problem on day 29? How many of you feel cats have more of a problem on day 29? So, interestingly, when it comes to this photo of a very nice homemade litter box is courtesy of Ingrid Johnson of fundamentally-feline.com. She's got a great website with some resource. But when it comes to cats, only 4% of cats are house soiling on day 1 after adoption. And on day 29, it's the same, only 4% of cats. So I know, surprising, right? We all think of kitties peeing in this house as this big, big problem, but I think it's those infrequent cases that we see that are like pulling out our hair and really can be frustrating sometimes, but it's actually pretty small, which is great news. So dogs. Dogs have a lot more of an issue, and that no matter the day we looked at, dogs were much, much more likely to be peeing in the house. So day 1 is the dark teal, day 29 is the light. On day 29, so a month after adoption, almost a third of our dogs were peeing in the house, and 20% of the dogs were pooping in the house 1 month after adoption. Interestingly, when we asked about these questions, so this was, is the issue happening or not happening? We also asked about these issues on day 7 and 14. But when we asked about it on those days, we asked if they were concerned about the problem. So this is, are they doing it? The others were, is this a concerning issue to you? And with the concerning, 21% were concerned on day 7 and 17% were concerned on day 14. So there's a lot less concern about the problem than what is actually happening, which is good news. But I think for me, so we don't know yet whether this is something we need to do much better in our follow-up efforts. We need to do much better in our education efforts. There is research that tells us that counseling people about house training at the time of adoption increases their success with house training in the home, and this data supports that that's something that's pretty important to talk about. All right, and I am going to skip by this one in the interest in time, but this was, you can see well, actually, I'm not going to skip. I can't skip. I'll just try to talk fast. Other behaviors, once again, day 3 in teal, day 29 in gray. So these can be objectionable behaviors for some people. The highest percentage was of not having any of these issues, but you can see that for every single problem, barking, stealing things off counters, jumping on people, play biting, they all get worse over time. So this might be an indicator that pets are just settling into their homes and getting more excited. It also might be an indicator that maybe this is something we need to be following up with 2 weeks. Once they've settled in a little bit, maybe then that's a good time to start talking to them about these things if they are potentially going to be a problem. Once again, this is presence or absence. We don't know how concerning it is to people. So in conclusion, the app appears to be a useful tool for adoption follow-up. Luckily, problems are relatively uncommon. I shared the inappropriate elimination, which did have a higher prevalence, but almost everything that we looked at had a pretty, and then I happened to share the ones that had the highest, but things like aggression and fear, the prevalence of those types of issues were actually very, very low, which was very good for us to see. And we at Maddies Fund really like that it allows you all to focus on the small percentage of pets that have more serious problems, and this app can help all those people who have less serious problems where the app can give them an automatic answer. All right, on to the last topic, and that is going to be adult dog foster care. This is a project that I'm super, super excited about. First, learned about Kristen Auerbach's work through Shelley Thompson, who's sitting in the front row. She went to a SAWA conference in 2015 where Kristen presented these research results that were showing her putting these more challenged big dogs out into foster care with some pretty darn amazing results. So it was 52 dogs in her. How many of you are aware of her initial project? Some of you. Initially, they put 52 dogs in foster care, and these were more behaviorally challenged dogs and dogs who they'd had challenges finding homes for, and they found homes for 90% of the dogs. And 40% were adopted in less than a week, and these were dogs that often had been in the shelter for a really long time, and those dogs are like, what the heck am I going to do? And 40% adopted in less than a week. 48% adopted in another 48% adopted in less than a month. So very, very positive results to this program, and Maddies Fund being big supporters of foster care, we learned about this and said, wow, this is something we want to explore further and do a lot more work with to see if we're going to get the same results at other shelters and rescues, because this was something that Kristen got results at this one shelter at one point in time, but that doesn't necessarily tell us that everybody else is going to have the same results. So will we get good results elsewhere? So with this project, we decided to recruit open admission shelters who had attended a Maddie's medium and large dog apprenticeship, which at the time was happening at Austin Animal Center. How many of you have participated in one of those apprenticeships? Oh, we've got a couple in the audience. Is there anybody here who is part of this project? Nobody, which is not surprising because it's only 6 shelters. Our focus for this project was on medium and large dogs who had been in the shelter for over 21 days. We didn't focus on behavior for this project because every shelter has different criteria for what they're comfortable adopting it out and putting in foster care versus not. And we like to have standardized agreement in terms of who's participating in the project. So instead we focused on length of stay. And we evaluated behavior in the shelter and compared it to behavior in foster care. And there's some tiny little dots on here that are showing the shelters that are currently actively participating in this project. So Los Angeles Animal Services, Ventura County Animal Services, Pima Animal Care Center, Austin Animal Center, KC Pet Project, Louisville Metro Animal Services, and New York Animal Care Centers. And this is the incredible Kelly Doer, who I believe is in the audience here, who is the amazing person behind the implementation of this project. So after the people attended the apprenticeship, Kelly also visited each of these shelters to help work with them and learn from them, learn what they were experiencing, what their challenges were, so that they could implement this foster program. And so now we're going to share the super exciting results from this project. So this was the survey that either shelter staff, so 3 to 5 weeks after the dog was in the shelter staff completed this survey, so a number of different descriptions. It is pretty subjective. We wanted to get people's general ideas and impressions of these dogs. So this is playful. If I selected 1, this dog is never, ever, ever playful. If I selected 5, this dog plays all the time, which there probably aren't many dogs that actually play all the time. And so you can see the adjectives there. I'll be going through these with the results. But a number of different things that we asked about. So we asked about these things 3 to 5 weeks after entering the shelter, 1 day after entering foster care, and then a week after entering foster care. And there were other things we asked about too, but this is the biggest part of the results we have thus far. And this is what we found. And every single one of these pictures are actually foster dogs who were involved in the project. And so the results for every single one of those categories, we found statistically significant results. So every single thing on that survey, the positive things get more positive and the negative things get less. So it was just incredible results showing, sorry, I get emotional about it, showing the power of foster care. So more good days than bad days. That kind of makes sense, right? We found that foster dogs are less nervous. And so this is a post saying, less than 24 hours into the foster study, transformed from tail tucked and scared into a total cuddle and love machine. Suki from D67. Foster dogs are more friendly to people. I love this picture because I feel like this kid and this dog kind of have the same look on their face. It's the cutest, right? And this is actually the exact same dog that is in that previous picture. So this is after adoption. And this is before adoption. And this was the post that got this dog adopted. But we found that foster dogs are more friendly to people. This, you can see a KC Pet Project dog, but cute little post of dog and kid watching iPad. What a great night to be snuggled up inside next to a dog. Bruno is enjoying his time in his foster home, watching YouTube videos and cuddling with the kids. And so this other family saw this and they're like, we want that too. And they took him home. Foster dogs are less unsure and insecure, and what a demonstration of that in this dog's before and after photos, right? You can just see how unsure he is there, and then just can we attribute words like happy to a dog, but I would argue with anyone who's going to tell me that dog is not happy. Foster dogs are more confident. How do you assess confidence? Can't really tell you scientifically, but people's impressions were that the dogs were more confident once they were in foster homes. Foster dogs are less anxious, and I just, there's something about this picture that I just adore. I almost feel like they're like, we're not doing anything here, we're just sitting here, nothing going on. Less anxious, and they're more relaxed. So they get in a home environment, it makes sense that they're more relaxed. They're less boisterous and noisy. That makes sense too, right? A lot of these things that make sense, but how nice is it that we now have research that you can take back and tell people all of these things. Foster dogs are more playful. They bark less. That dog looks like she doesn't have much to bark about. They display less repetitive behavior. How can you be spinning circles when you're on a little lounger in the pool? And then the best results, foster dogs are happier. And this is also a project dog, and what a cute and adorable smile. And for those of you who like to actually see the data and instead of have the cute pictures associated with everything, so this is the actual data that's showing us the dark teal at 3 to 5 weeks in the shelter, then 24 hours in foster, and then 7 days in foster in the dark gray. So you can see with every single one on these positive, things improve. And every single on these more negative, things reduce over time. And like I said, statistically significant results. So our conclusions about this project are that our foster care reduces negative behavior, improves positive behavior when compared to behavior in shelter. And I forgot to mention that the shelter staff filled out the surveys in the shelter, the foster caregiver filled out the survey in the foster home. They had no idea what the shelter people filled out, which I think makes this even more powerful. It also tells us that this strategic implementation of foster care for healthy adult dogs works, and that's super exciting. And we also learned, and this is something we all talk about, is start your programs off small and grow, because we have had a learning curve from this, and something in that there is one shelter who participated in the project who really wasn't ready for it, and they had to back off a little bit from the project and did foster day trips instead of the full shebang adult dog foster care, because they had a lot of challenges over the summer and they just didn't have enough resources to do it. And that was okay. Starting small is still moving forward, right? So next steps, which we're super excited about, next steps is going to be a bigger project. So stay tuned in terms of what's going on with us. You may be able to participate in it, but we're going to be recruiting. It's probably not going to be until next November or so, but over 100 shelters across the United States to participate in our next phase of research here. And coming up soon, much sooner than that, we're going to be having a series of foster care short webcasts about different ways to do foster care. And we're going to have a foster care innovation grant cycle opening up the first week of April. So you can apply for a grant of up to $5,000 to help you implement a new foster program at your shelter. And overall conclusions. I've talked about a lot here today, but we want to use existing foster caregivers. This is what we learned from our foster care market research to recruit new ones. Playgroups are good. Maddies Pet Assistant is good. And foster care saves lives, so lots of positive results. If you want to stay up to date on what's going on with our research and our projects, sign up for Maddie Network, and you can see maddiesfund.org/Maddie Network, or if you just go to maddiesfund.org, you'll see it there. And how many of you have heard about Maddies Pet Forum? This is where I shamelessly plug things. So a number of you have, which is great. But we've started a discussion forum for everybody in the shelter and rescue world where we can talk about things and solve problems together. And we encourage you all to join Maddies Pet Forum and become a part of the discussion. Thank you all so much for coming. And if you have questions, I'd love to talk to you up here. Thank you, everyone.